evening, everyone, and welcome to this special panel discussion on creating a regenerative and green economy at the 8th edition of the Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum, organized by ATREE and the Biodiversity Collaborative for the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing, alongside the Balipara Foundation. I would like to thank all the panelists for being here, and we look forward to an engaging and lively session. Our panel today brings together an eclectic group of people with experience from years of research and on-the-ground work with business and communities in this arena. So important today as world leaders debate both a green recovery and a great reset in the wake of COVID-19's damage to our collective health, well-being, and economy, and the growing recognition that ecology is the heart of economy. The moderator for tonight's session is Dr. Nitin Pandit, Director of the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. Previously, he was the Director of Priority Initiatives at the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C., focusing on restoration and energy efficiency after serving as the CEO of WRI India. Before WRI, Dr. Pandit was president of the International Institute for Energy Conservation for implementing novel sustainable energy approaches for developing countries. He has prior experience in consultancy with a specialization in the use of AI in environmental and renewable energy systems. He is joined tonight by Dr. Nawn, an economist by disciplinary training with a doctoral degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he teaches the interface of environment development and economics. His present research interests are in ecological economics, environment and development, and environmental economic accounting. Before joining TERI SAS in 2014, he taught in the West Bengal National University of Judicial Sciences since 2001. His works have been published in various journals, including the Journal of Agrarian Change, Economic and Political Weekly, and the Journal of Human Development and Capabilities. He has recently co-edited Ecology, Economy and Society, Essays in Honor of Kanchan Chopra, Global Change, Ecosystems and Sustainability, and Economic Challenges for the Contemporary World. He was the head of Department of Policy Studies at TERI SAS and Secretary of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. He has been a recipient of doctoral fellowships from University Grants Commission and the Indian Council of Social Science Research and Fulbright Nehru International Education Administrator Seminar Scholarship, besides being an associate at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study. He is presently the managing editor of Ecology, Economy and Society, the INSEE Journal, a guest co-editor of the Review of Environment and Development in Economic and Political Weekly, and coordinator of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell at TERI SAS. Dr. Kanchan Chopra was formerly director of the Institute of Economic Growth at Delhi University, where she was professor. She has been on the editorial and policy boards of several international journals, including Environment and Development Economics and Ecological Economics, and was senior associate of the Ecological and Environmental Economics program hosted by the ICTP in Trieste, Italy. She was member of the assessment panel of the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment and co-chair of its working group on response options. She is a fellow of the Baija Institute of Ecological Economics, Stockholm, and of the South Asia Network of Development and Environmental Economics. She was president of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics and president of the Indian Society of Agricultural Economics. Currently, she co-edits Ecology, Economy and Society, the Journal of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. Dr. Rajkamal Goswami hails from the remote northeastern region of India, where the bulk of India's forests and biodiversity is concentrated. With his efforts, the first protected area of the Jaintia Hills was established in 2014. He's also working with local communities to declare some of the last remaining community-owned primary tropical evergreen forests as community reserves, a protected area category under Indian wildlife law. He is also promoting the globally threatened hoolock gibbon as a conservation mascot for the tropical forest of this region, through which he hopes to attract wider conservation attention for their precarious plight. He is hopeful that the nascent ecotourism initiative he helped to kickstart will not only discourage hunting by creating avenues for conservation friendly income sources, but also save one of the last remaining hoolock gibbon populations of these hills. Aneeta Dutta is the Deputy Director of the Rashtriya Gramin Vikas Nidhi, RGVN, where she has been working for 25 years. RGVN focuses on rural livelihoods and financial inclusion, and Aneeta Datta heads the financial inclusion area, which has partnered with the Crystal Foundation. The financial inclusion program has received the President's Award for the Best CSR project and has positively impacted over 200,000 women. I now turn it over to Dr. Pandit to set the context for today's conversation. Over to you, Dr. Pandit.
Thank you, Joanna. Good morning from here in the US, in the east coast of the US, where it's getting a little cooler on the outside, but I believe the political temperatures are rising on the inside. So I think overall we're probably okay. But be that as it may, it's a pleasure to address this audience and be with this super panel that has been put together with the help of the Palipara Foundation and in support of the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. The mission was launched with the help of the Principal Scientific Advisor of India, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, over a year ago now. And the idea of the mission was to bring together the best research organizations in India working on biodiversity specifically, and to see how biodiversity plays a role in different segments of society, in different sectors. Therefore, the mission contains 6 components and an overarching component where all the data are gathered and integrated so that we can look at the analysis where biodiversity plays a role in human well-being from several perspectives. With that as it may, as it is, I would like to now talk about the current session that we are dealing with today. The title of the session is Towards a New Regenerative and Green Economy, Challenges and Opportunities. There's a little context to this. When you look at what the World Bank did in 2014 and before that, I believe the study was called Greening India's Growth. From a larger perspective, the study was a very detailed analysis of what were the damages that are caused in the process of development that we follow. In fact, at that time, when the GDP growth was supposed to be around 8.3%, the study revealed that a staggering 5.7% of it was actually to be negated because it essentially extracted from our environment and in fact is the negative component of that growth. So therefore our net growth increase was actually not as much as what we thought it to be. It's like taking money out of your bank and using it and saying that essentially you're using it for growth during that particular year for some benefits that you might accrue. Therefore, it becomes very important that while we have some tools to measure what our economic growth might be, it is important to see how the green economy can actually be used as a tool to look at a truly regenerative way of living in the future, where the quality of life and the environment around us improves as we go along. It is certainly directly in the crosshairs of the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. Now, so far, economists have given us several tools to measure the market value of nature and to incorporate this in what is called the system of natural accounts. The monetary value of biodiversity and ecosystem services, there are several methods to measure this and assess it at global, national, and regional levels. However, these are not easy issues to deal with, and therefore, in most parts of the world, business as usual has continued, where non-representative measures like the GDP are used to define progress and development, not considering other parts of the environment and the damage and the degradation that it incurs. In most parts of the world, there was a recognition when COVID-19 struck that in fact there is a very close connection between biodiversity and development in the first place. And in fact, we cannot ignore it anymore. For the first time, public health has been prioritized over business, income, and profits at all levels of society, including the individual level, where the improvement of the quality of life, human health and life, has taken front and center stage. In this context, COVID-19 provides us with the opportunity of showcasing the healthy, ethical, and green choices that we must make in response to the growing demand for reimagining our growth and development across nations, corporations, institutions, and individuals. In order to do this, we must change our focus to demonstrating not only the economic value of nature in a traditional sense, to a more intuitive sense where it can lead to policy designs that are more friendly towards our environmental systems as well as our human systems. But one component of it is in fact the human component, and where the need to address the socio-economic needs of humans as a part of the ecosystem needs to be realized. And numerators which are not taken into traditional economic analyses, such as employment and gainful employment, and then turnover and income from bioresources. These are typically outside the ambit of traditional economics that we must now not ignore anymore. The value of the co-benefits that are attributable to interventions that take these into account, such as augmentation of the biodiversity, improvement of ecosystem services and public health, the impact of zoonotic diseases, those need to be articulated in a much better and a policy-friendly manner. So with that in mind, I'll bring my initial remarks to a close and then throw open some questions to the panel who have over the years studied these subjects, but from different perspectives. And what we hope to get in this session are those different perspectives so that we can compare and contrast what options might be available for us for natural capital management moving forward. So with that in mind, let me sort of throw open a general question that I would then walk through. First question would be, how can we, broadly speaking, integrate the concept of human livelihoods in terms of labor, employment, and jobs with respect to ecology and economy? And that is, how can we better estimate the potential for livelihoods and livelihoods improvement in the sort of a reimagined way of going about in our day-to-day lives, whether it's agriculture or nature tourism or any other biodiversity-based rural livelihoods. So if I can just throw that question out to the panel, maybe I can get a starting point. Nandan, may I ask you to comment on this?
Thank you, Nitin, and thanks to Balipara Foundation and National Biodiversity Mission for organizing this. As we look at this particular question, this question is the core of, I think, today's discussion as to how do we integrate labor, or how do we see labor in the ecological economy that two circles or concentric circles. Historically, if we look at it, that almost always it was seen that a rise in the economic system has been at the cost of the lowering of biodiversity. And so there has been seen as kind of a trade-off, and that is how different models have been looked at. labor has not been seen as any of the way in which these two circles were connected to each other. Later, the recent biodiversity science or sustainability science arguing that look at first from the other side, and that is that look at the increase in biodiversity or ecosystem flows, and that is an essential connection to the economic system. Once again, labor is not there in it. The reason is obvious. The obvious because the most of the benefits that you can look at it that is collected through the harvesting or gathering, most of it do not reach the market. As a result of which the economic system ignores these natural resource-based livelihoods. So if you look at it, even agriculture for the matter, it is a natural resource-based livelihood, but the poultry income that people make from the agriculture has resulted into crores of earlier farmers or people who used to be farmers earlier are leaving that job. The reason, once again, as I said, that it is to do with the fact that there is no recognition from the economic system and in terms of money. Aspirations, on the other hand, due to the revolution that has happened to the communication medium, that cannot be denied. And as a result of which, I would say that the way to proceed, or for the matter, how do we see it? Recognition of the labor, and recognition of the labor happens only through a process of collectivization or collaboration. Amul is a good example in which the labor was rewarded and rewarded in a sustainable manner. So I would like to see that the sustainable bioeconomy based endeavor, which is a form of a cooperative, good example being Amul, is one way to see that how such labor, natural resource, economic connections can be made. Over to you, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you. That captures it in a very succinct manner, Nandan. A lovely description. I'd like to sort of dwell a little bit on this. In terms of looking at creating a bioeconomy-based model, and where we start looking at sort of the collectivization of human and other effort towards a model that is more sustainable. Can you add a little more light on how specific sectors such as agriculture or tourism or others might be able to look at this lens, that you've provided, and that in fact you've mentioned Amul in particular. But does that model apply across all these sectors, and how does one think through that process?
Uh, if you look at it, that the biggest challenge, or so far as recognition of labor in the economic system is concerned, about the smallness of the entrepreneurs, or for that matter, those who are willing to provide labor. That smallness was addressed in the Amul model. For a long time, there are very recent times, the Farm Bill is supposed to address that particular challenge of smallness. That is that small farmers or small producers of non-timber forest products. Even India's agroforestry policy also allows such cultivation, but somehow or the other that is not happening. Government of India is trying to provide subsidies to create farm producer organization. So there are changes that are happening on the ground, but one is not sure whether Amul can be replicated because there are powerful interests also, which will be able to make monetary gains out of the surplus generated by the poorly paid laborers and nature. So there were discussions, but I believe that collectivization is an essential requirement of this. FPOs is one, but at the same point of time, looking at how this money or the income can be realized by generating a sustained demand, by looking at the demand question, I think this is something. These are the churning points. I'd say the churning is already there. On the one hand, aspiration. On the other hand, that the fact that rural areas, COVID-19 is a good example, that COVID has resulted in reverse migration. So the rural areas have to generate their sustained employment, and industrialization is not happening. So what is the way out? I think this is something that is already in place. Okay.
I see. So one of the things that, and the reason obviously I asked the question was whether in fact that model becomes replicable and in fact can be replicated across different sectors. Let me take that question over to Aneeta, if I could, for a second. There are a lot of these solutions, such as Amul and other collectivization solutions that have been proposed, some of them experimented with, and like Amul, some of them in large scale operation through aggregation in a very thoughtful way. The question becomes, these are solutions, but Nandan just mentioned about demand. Is this a solution looking for demand, or is there demand? And is that a reason why we may or may not be seeing sort of the kind of equitable growth that we need to see in a green economy at the ground level? And I know you've been involved in sort of financial inclusion at the ground level, and I'm wondering if the replicability of that model faces any challenges as you start implementing it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandit, and thank you, Bali Para Foundation, for having me today. Now, you see, I'm not a scientist and I cannot speak of any technology, but I work very close to people. I work, basically with people's minds and hearts and hurts, and I try to understand and listen to their problems. You see, when you are working with 200,000 women, and you keep getting data on them, feedback on them, you try to listen to what they have to say. What is it that they are saying? Do they like this idea of collectivization? Are they going to work towards it? Now, you see, there's a lot of pressure on us also as NGO people, as field workers, that we have to go in for collectivization. Okay. And you see, in Assam, in a place like Assam where I'm working, the Northeast, Assam, the self-help group movement has become pretty strong. Okay. There are many self-help groups, and the Assam State Rural Livelihood Mission is really taking them forward. Okay. Though they are 10-member groups, it is not difficult to collectivize a particular livelihood. Okay. Of course, Amul, okay, Amul, this cooperative called Amul, it is, beyond imagination that it has worked so well. But of course, other Amul models have also worked very well in the field of, milk supply, milk chains, okay? Now, but when we are talking about farmers, producers, organizations, you see, NABARD and governmental institutions are pressurizing us that you go in for FPOs, and I work in an NGO. So what happens in an NGO, you look for things which, give you benefits and also provide finance for doing so, okay? Because financing is a very difficult area, especially in Northeast, okay? It's very difficult to get finance. So we have started looking at government models, the FPO, farmer producers organizations, and how do we set it up? I think collectivization is an answer. And we are not only thinking of FPOs, but we are also thinking of farm producers organizations, OFPOs, okay? Recently, we have started a silk, a ATREE silk project. And though we start, it's very organic, it's very close to people's hearts, and it is also a cultural, livelihood here. So what happens is we think that it is perhaps going to work very well. It will work, because then you are able to get a fair price. Farmers together, producers together are able to look for markets, explore markets, look for hand holding, etc. And they should be able to also get it. Okay. So, when there's one self-help group or 5 self-help groups, nobody looks at them. Okay. But if there are 10 or 20 self-help groups coming together for a particular livelihood, it is going to be the future. But of course, presently what is happening is, self-help groups, it is very difficult to get them to do a group activity. But now we have started because we know that this is the way out. This is how they can bargain for their rights. This is how they can, get the maximum out of the schemes which are available. Okay. And so I think this will work out. That way, I'm with Dr. Nitin, Nandan, and I think that what you have said is a good thing. That this is the way out. We can look at the future, as far as this is concerned. Okay, and okay, now we are field workers. Okay, working with self-help groups. Now we hear of the government's green economic policy and generation of green jobs. Okay, but the thing is, you're talking at a macro level. How do you connect it with the micro level? How do you ensure that people at the grassroots are trained? They have the requisite skill sets to take up this and to move forward. Okay, this is something which we got to integrate before we move on. So I think that is what I would like to say about this. Thank you.
Yeah. No, let me tease that question a little bit further on this. We'll come to the skill sets part as we go along, and about between the macro and the micro. But just dwelling on that question of the collectivization and so on, the efforts in the cooperative sector as well as for FPOs has been a collectivization of the producers. So they're still on the supply side of the chain in some sense. The question is there demand? Okay. I mean, how does collectivization occur on the demand side? And is your experience with SHGs, which are different from FPOs, okay, is the collectivization of SHGs the answer towards generation of the kind of demand that you want to see? And is there an institutional difference between those that needs to be highlighted that perhaps is not as visible to the folks who are not as deeply engaged at the ground level as you are?
Yeah, here I would, like to tell you that first of all, the cooperative movement, okay, it has failed miserably in many parts of the country. Okay, the Northeast being one, because it has so much of government interference in this. So that's why you see the whole farmer producers organizations, okay, the farmer producer organizations or the off-farm producers organizations, that has come up as an alternative. Okay, I would not even call it an extension of the cooperative movement, but it is an alternative. Okay, because there are various ways in which the powers are now going to be vested in the farmers producers organizations, not in any government machinery who is going to interfere with them. I think this is a very important change when you look at it. Now, going to your question about SHGs, and you see, SHG is a manner of collectivization. Okay, you have 10, 12, 15 members learning to work together. But in many of the areas where I work, I have also set up clusters, okay, where many SHGs can come together. Okay, people like in Assam, I'm just telling you because this is the area where I have expertise in the Northeast. Women are skill weavers. If they come together and pool in their resources, pool in their talent, their skill sets, their traditional knowledge. Okay, so this is how a farmers producers organization can be formed. This is the transition from the cooperative, Okay, first of all, the change between the cooperative and the FPOs, and also how self-help groups can lead to collectivization in a large way.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay.
now regarding your supply and demand chain, okay, the supply chain is nowhere developed. Okay, it is still in its infancy. Okay, there are people, there are farmers markets, etc., but it is still in a very, I mean, I would say it's in a very kind of early stage. Okay, so we have to think of many ways on how we can, talk about the supply, how we can increase the supply, and also talk about the green methods of agriculture to use all this. And then the demand. Okay, we feel that demand is there, but it is supply that does not match the demand. And what happens is that, even the demand, okay, even the demand, it has to be put together, it also has to be collectivized, it has to be through some proper channels. Okay, then we can take it forward in a better way.
Correct. Okay. Very good. Let me, you've talked about these experiences, both, yourself and Nandan. Let me ask Kanchan about this. When you look at sort of the history of such interventions, and when you look at the instruments that have been utilized and the incentives to facilitate the move towards a green economy, uh, what does that tell us about the institutional arrangements that may be required to move forward so that these interventions can be effective? What does experience tell us about this so far?
Thank you, Nandan, for bringing me into this, and thanks to the Balpara Foundation for inviting me. As I listened to Nandan and to Aneeta, I was taken back to the decades of Indian experience in the context of the association between the micro and the macro, because we have a large number of we have a large number of experiments on the ground, starting from the 80s and the 90s, when we had participation and decentralization as the focus. And I remember in Rajasthan, around Udaipur, a large number of these experimentations going on, also elsewhere in the country. But we need a link. We need a link between the macro and the micro, so that micro experiments can do well. Many a time, what happened, especially in the case of an experiment documented by Kishore Sent in Rajasthan, that the micro experiment was going on very well, and the law from the center prevented it from so we need a kind work on the ground. If
Mhm.
macro policies and instruments, they are not vision of the collectivization or participation, especially in areas like watershed management, will not happen if we have uh, policies from the center which do not support such things. Now, I'll take a little time to look at the policies from the center, which had been coming up reasonably well in the 90s and the first decade of this century, in order to support such ground level initiatives. Long ago, there was a small notification in 1990 which helped in bringing about joint forest management. Following that, watershed guidelines in 1992, which helped in improving, in replicating the watershed participatory experience in many parts of the country with varying degrees of success. I'll not say it was a success everywhere, but with varying degrees of success. And there is a way in which some of our workings on the ground in a way appropriate the best kind of institutions. So we need to have work at the ground level, work from the grassroots, so to say, which helps us to see where the mistakes in policy are. But policy has also to move in a certain direction. I'd like to draw attention to National Environment was
Kanchan, we're losing you quite a bit.
stakeholders in society. Is that am I not audible? Oh my. Yeah, is it better now, Nitin? Is it
A
okay?
little better, Kanchan. We lost a little bit of what you said for about 1 minute or so.
I was just drawing attention to the environmental policy of 2006, which was drawn up with extensive interactions with the grassroots organizations, with interactions with somewhere we had the Forest Rights Act, we had the many other things, even the information, the right to information played a huge role in helping people to bring all issues to the forefront, to the social media and to the media. My essential point is that we need to have a link between uh, experiments at the ground, at the grassroots level, these collectivization and other experiments need to feed back into the macro level policy, and they need to be supported by macro level policy. A kind of two-way interaction is what is needed. But we are a long distance from that. We know that we take two steps forward and one step backward. When we look at the environmental impact assessment, which is actually the practical part of government policy, we had good movements for the environmental circulated in 2020 is actually going two steps backward. And I will not go into the details of that. It does not really look at what we learn from the grassroots experiments. It only tries to uh, choose speed of implementation of projects. It tries to choose speed at the cost of diligence. We want to get development projects done. There are two lobbies always at work in the context of policy. There is the so-called development lobby environmental lobby. And these need to be, we need to see that development is about the environment. And that is where we need to work together. We need to work both from the academics, from the workers at the grassroots levels, the different experiments, replication of these experiments. It's a huge journey. In a democracy, I I feel the right to information, the social media plays a very important role, and we need to bring all these things into the, bring a kind of feedback mechanism macro to micro. There are statements of it, the solar energy thing, the consortium that we have, the international statements made in international agencies and international forums. But then again, there is a certain understanding that in the short run, we need more jobs, we need more growth, and therefore we need more projects. And we forget about the green economy. Now, how do we bring these two together? That is the challenge. I'll stop here and come back if there is anything else that I can contribute to this discussion. At the moment, I'll stop here. Thank you,
Uh,
Nitin. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Kanchan. That's a very quick overview of the rich history of some of the things that have worked and things that still need to work. And it sort of brings me, to one of my teachers and mentors, Lynn Ostrom, who would have talked
Oh,
about different kinds of institutional arrangements that would be needed, what she referred to as nested institutions,
I know, I
where you
know,
would look
I
at
know,
institutions
I
at
know.
local and landscape levels and all the way aggregating into policy. But the process to
Yeah.
reach that is still a long drawn process, and it will probably take some time before we reach there. But in fact, are there any examples, where something like this can happen? I mean, Nandan and Aneeta talked about, Amul as being an example, and policy intervention that is now proposed through the FPOs as an intervention that one might look at. From your experience, Kanchan, have you thought about or have you any history of interventions that we can still look at, which might give us an inkling as to how these nested institutions might be made to work in our context here?
The closest I can think of, I won't call it a nested institution, but it is a scaling up. It is the watershed program, which has seen movement from individual experiments to a policy and then to replication. Replication in Madhya Pradesh, replication in Andhra Pradesh, maybe the new Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, which that area, and Orissa. But of course, some people would say that JFM, but I'm talking of watershed management here, and it has seen a coming back in the NREGA programs again. So if you look through from the 90s to the NREGA program, 80s we had only Sukhmajari, Ralegaon Siddhi and so on. 90s we had watershed guidelines and some states doing it in Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, and maybe in Andhra Pradesh, and then NREGA, where you have soil conservation, watershed development as a part of the NREGA now. And of course, that is where jobs also come in. Rural jobs are also created. Someone needs to look at this. What is the job creation potential of some of these programs? Long ago, one of my students did it, but I've forgotten what she found out.
Well, we must refer to that. In fact, I suspect that Rajkamal would probably want to look at that research, since I believe, Raj, you're looking at an example where one would need to look at all these mechanisms, whether it's NREGA, whether it's the FPO's policies and so on, and where some of this can come together into, you might say, institutional or policy design that would help in the area of growth of jobs, as well as sort of conservation and restoration of biodiversity. Maybe you can speak to us about that and share some of your experiences, and we would then go around and ask for others to opine on what you are working on right now.
Thanks, Nitin, for your wonderful moderation, and also thanks to Balipara and the National Mission on Biodiversity for organizing this brilliant panel. I personally feel very privileged to be part of this very elite set of thinkers from around the world today, talking about one very important issue. And so far, the issues raised by all the panelists and the moderator has been very, very insightful, and has teased out many of the things that we have been thinking about. So what Nitin is referring to is a recent analysis that we did, which will feed into one of the special issues that is being edited, in fact, by Nandan, apart from a set of other co-editors, which is basically looking at the pathways and the potential of different interventions which can feed into the green economy, but particularly in the aftermath of COVID-19. So, like Kanchan correctly mentioned, there's a long history of the idea of green economy being floated, how it feeds into with the existing institutions at both micro and macro level, how we need to connect these two. But in my experience and what we all have seen is, till COVID-19 struck, most of this has been at the realm of discussions, and while there has been some kind of interventions being looked at from the perspective of feeding into the demand part of it. So for example, employment, but it was never tried, there was never a implicit or explicit like intention or some kind of that policy directive was not there to link it to the green or how to design a green economy around the question of employment, for example, which has been plaguing a developing economy like India for a long time. So with that question in mind, what we tried to see was we took the recent flashpoint of the huge reverse migration that we saw, and we also were aware that the village economy is not in a very great shape, the rural economy, so to say, both the production as well as the non-farm parts of the rural economy. So the huge reverse migration that we see, apart from the NREGA initiatives, which is also has come to be underfunded in the recent years, how do we absorb this huge demand of employment that is going to be like generated in the rural landscape? And there we felt that the issue of restoration, which has been going on for many decades in the realm of ecology, looking at how you can ecologically and sustainably restore landscape, which will not just increase the productivity of the landscape, but it will also improve the biodiversity and the biodiversity-based livelihoods of the landscape. And from the ecologist perspective, we see employment and the improvement in the farm productivity as co-benefits. But because we are in ATREE and we always try to look from alternative perspectives, even though my specialization is from a very biodiversity and ecology based research, for this particular paper, we turned the lens and we started looking at the employment potential and rural landscape regeneration as prime benefits, and started looking at biodiversity and other benefits as co-benefits, so as to have a better dialogue with the policymakers that we were trying to directly address through this paper. And what we found was the land available according to the official statistics of the government of India, which we also looked at critically and not just took the entire atlas, because we saw certain loopholes and certain lacunae there in the way they had framed some of the categories of wastelands. So we found that there is a nice congruence between the area that is currently available, an underestimated area that is currently available for landscape restoration, which is roughly around 29 million hectares, which kind of matches the 26 million hectares that India has pledged as part of the Bond Challenge, which seeks to restore like about 50% of the degraded landscape across the world as part of the UNDP initiative. And it will actually employ about to the tune of about 1,058 million labor days. And the amount of money that will be required is almost equal to the increment that the government of India has allotted on top of the annual budgets for Manrega initiative, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act initiative. So, so this paper should be accepted, I feel, very soon. We'll get a final decision from the editors on this. But I think the kind of so our main focus was to bridge that gap what Kanchan and Aneeta was talking about between the macro policies and the demand and the micro scale, both in terms of demand for employment, demand for better farm productivity, demand for non-farm employment. And in the rural sector, all these things are linked. So if you have better farm productivity, even the non-farm rural economy boosts up. And if there is an improvement in the biodiversity, there will be a huge boost to the bioresource-based livelihoods, what Nandan was talking about broadly in the sphere of bioeconomy, which is not entirely dependent on the like agricultural produce economy. So this is very briefly what we tried to do, and one of the main intention was to bridge the gap between the macro policy and the micro demand.
So this is actually quite fascinating, because as one sees it, here's an opportunity, and this panel was to talk about challenges which we have and the opportunities that exist. But the opportunity, broadly speaking, is not only in sort of the area of restoration, which is a smaller opportunity unto itself, because it allows us to experiment with the process of building, designing and creating institutions which are sort of nested, or you might say at different levels, where it actually can add up to a policy instrument that can hopefully make sense. But what it does do is enable us to go through the process of doing that, which is what Kanchan was saying. It doesn't yet exist in terms of connecting the macro to the micro policy and the implementation on the ground. So potentially, in doing so, ultimately at the end of the day, I just saw a quote from our Honorable Prime Minister the other day, where the 26 million hectares was discussed as a part of our commitment to the Bond Challenge, as well as to the UNCCD in terms of this thing. So there are many things coming together on that. There is also our NDC 3 under the carbon sequestration requirement to the Paris Agreement, where it plays into, so restoration plays a substantial role in all these commitments that we have at a global scale, and then therefore at a national scale. But the question is, what are the institutional requirements needed so that on the ground changes can actually add up to those policy impacts that we want to see? I think this feels like a tremendous opportunity for everyone to sort of work on and see how, in fact, we can interject other mechanisms, whether they are in our experience with building cooperatives and FPOs and creating collectives and aggregations of them, but also in bringing together what Aneeta was speaking about, which is how do you bring skills development into this process? Because a substantial amount of skill development will need to be done. How do institutions like NSDC and others play a role in this process? How do we bring Manrega funds to support this, in addition to other funds that are there in what should I say, a disparate fashion all across the government, whether it's CAMPA, whether there are any state funds, et cetera, et cetera. Any commentary on what this opportunity might provide us in sort of trying to restore our lands, especially we're using ecological restoration to build back the biodiversity and a bioresource-based economy? Let me go for a last round on this one question for everyone, one by one, starting with Nandan.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I missed your question. I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The question,
Nitin.
yeah, the question was that given that this is an opportunity that brings a lot of these issues together, and where one can look at the process of connecting the micro and the macro policies, and to bring together the different types of funding that can be made available, whether it's in skills development or in CAMPA types of funds or any state funds and so on. How does one think about institutional design as we go forward towards such a green economy? As an example, I throw it out as a question. There could be other examples, but this is one of them. Starting with Nandan, and we'll go through one round, and I think at that time we'll probably come to the close of our session.
Nitin, in my experience of the bioeconomic programs of in the recent times, one has seen a transition, and that is from the skill development to entrepreneurship development. So the subsidy has been given to the group of people and coming up with equipment, be it in equipment or be it something else, but there has been a transition that has happened. So we have moved away from the skill formation to entrepreneurship formation. And on the other hand, the institutions or institutional subsidies given to group of people, for example, beehives, or rather honey producers collaborative. I think one has to the other reading of the literature on these bioeconomic programs in the last 20 years time. It also showcases that the success of such intervention has been higher in case such intervention with leverage with an existing one. For example, if MNREGA can be reimagined, it is already within the scope. The ecological restoration is definitely within the scope. But in case it is foregrounded, MNREGA already has a nationwide institutional setup present, how engineers is to evaluate, and everything is present. It's a question of tweaking the scope a little bit, pushing forward, given that United Nations have already declared the next decade as a decade of ecological restoration. I think there is a case of making ecological restoration enable livelihoods as a result of it bioeconomy. On the other hand, FPOs and the other institution incentives are going to be carried out. I'll stop here.
Very good, very succinct. Thank you, Nandan. Aneeta?
Yeah, I would like to reiterate that there has to be synergy at all levels. You know, sometimes I get this feeling that we have a lot of resource, but we are all working on our own. Okay. And what happens is that there has to be a bottoms up approach, not a top down approach. I think it is extremely important to have a bottoms up approach, to hear the voices of the people who actually need, you know, these kind of policies. And you have to hear them from the grassroots. That is the most important part of it. And you see, we have such successful Panchayati Raj institutions. Okay, we have panchayats in every village. Involve them, let them understand, evolve them, involve and evolve them. Let them understand the changes that are required, you know, and from from the grassroots you move upwards and then make your policies. Okay, and you see, I was working on financial inclusion, and let me tell you, during the COVID times, okay, so many people were coming back to the villages. I work in 800 villages. Okay, so there was data on people coming back, how many people were able to access all these schemes which the government had given. Okay, which was giving through the different schemes, you know, PM Kisan, Ujala, then MNREGA. Okay, and this whole study at that time also brought to light the different kinds of corruption at whatever level, and also the fact that most of the people, they are not included, they're not financially included, they don't have their papers in order, the bank accounts are all dormant. Okay, so you are trying to give them benefit of some national schemes, but let them learn to, you know, to get everything in order so that they can access their rights and entitlements. That was something which I really felt. And here we are talking about, you know, there is a difference between jobs and entrepreneurship. Okay, we are talking about jobs. Jobs is something else from entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is something which you have a passion for. But are we actually, you know, are we actually pairing the skill sets of people? Okay, are we looking at what their passion is and then giving them the skills to achieve that? I think that's where this whole NSDC thing has gone wrong. I just get this feeling. Okay, because I myself have got so many guys to do hospitality management. They go there, they stay for 2 months and they say, no, I can't do it. And they all just come back. So where are we? These are some of the few questions. And I feel there has to be, you know, very good synergy. There has to be very good pilot projects. The universities have to be involved. And then we can move forward. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. Such a lovely example on that hospitality sector. Kanchan, can you reflect on this?
I was thinking about it, and within there are two things we can do. The institutional part has to evolve, and I completely agree with Aneeta that we start from it's a bottoms up approach that is needed. But a bottoms up approach alone will not suffice because it may be brought by a sudden polluance the whole thing from actually flourishing and getting replicated as it should. So you need a kind of, I'd again go back to and fro between a bottoms up and a tops down approach, a kind of to and fro that would be required. Very difficult to achieve in practice, but within the current situation, if one is trying to look at what will work, I was thinking of agriculture and biodiversity. Agriculture is the closest to the kinds of where resources, biodiversity are important. One way of saying that. And within agriculture, we have sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture, and other interventions such as water, things that will save water and so on. All these initiatives have a job or an employment aspect, and they also have a productivity aspect. We need to combine these together, even within the existing private owned agriculture, privately owned land. We can have sustainable agriculture. We can simultaneously try for collective. It doesn't work. We can try for what the other day I was hearing a talk by Ace Maglu, and he was talking of reinstating technology. And reinstating technology meant technology that brings people back into the center of things, that brings jobs back. And that kind of technology, which is not only about automation, but is about people and about bringing them back into the center of whatever change we are thinking of, especially in the context of biodiversity and agriculture. When you have organic agriculture, when you link what is called within the agricultural economics, they like to think of it as crop diversification. Crop diversification and activity diversification, livelihoods which are based on livestock as well as agriculture. It has been done all the time, but no one has really focused attention on it as a kind of mix of dividing your risk agriculture and other activities linked to agriculture. Those are also the kinds of things that we can look at for increasing or doubling farm income as the government talks about it. We can think of those activities that enter new technology within the existing institutions, that creates more jobs and is closely linked to the bioeconomy. That's all I'd like to say at the moment.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll go into too much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kanchan. I'm sure a lot of the audience would probably call you back on this. Raj, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to close off on this, because I think we'll otherwise run past time. So if you can give a quick view on this, and then I'll just give some closing words.
Yeah, I think, I mean, most of the panelists have nicely summarized some of the gaps that exist in the institutional and the gap between the macro and the macro policies and the micro demands. And we always talk about top and bottom, but I think we academicians, which I feel we occupy the middle path, who can forge dialogue with both the policymakers as well as connect with the grassroots because of our inherent interest in the research aspect of it. We are set to, play a very important role in this. And we also need to see how we can institutionalize the role that academics and researchers can play, particularly in ensuring that the goals that we set from the grassroots, like what demands do grassroots people have, and what kind of targets or the economic goals that is targeted by policies, how to bridge this to. I think I would just like to emphasize on this, and we need to think more about it, how to institutionalize and what role that we can play. For example, when we talk about restoration, the goals of restoration becomes really, really important, and that we can play a very important role in monitoring those goals, whether those goals are being met or not. Otherwise, it will just become another flat policy employment program without realizing the core benefits of restoration, for example.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. What a great panel. Very engaging discussion. I think that it always appears as if when we get into something really interesting, that's when we have to call off time. And unfortunately, we have to bring that to a close. But it does mean that certainly the mission and Balipara Foundation are encouraged to have some more sessions like this. We, I'm sure, as panelists and as moderator, would like to engage further on these topics. We're just beginning to actually dive into where the meaty issues are, the tricky issues are, and we just sort of teased the appetite of the listeners and ourselves to delve into that point. So I must have you, the listeners, wait there with bated breath for further deliberations on this point. Joanna, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit, for guiding this session, and thank you, Dr. Nandan, Nawn, Dr. Kanchan Chopra, Dr. Rajkamal Goswami, Aneeta, for joining us tonight. Your insights on how green employment can be catalyzed in India offer a thought-provoking pathway for future action in the Eastern Himalayan region. We're honored you could join us, and as Dr. Pandit says, we hope this conversation will continue, and we hope to be in touch with you to continue that. And we look forward to driving the nature positive action agenda alongside you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.